When 22-year-old Isabella Rodriguez heard her 8-year-old stepson call her his real mom on national television, nobody in the Family Feud studio was prepared for the family earthquake that would follow. But it wasn't just what little Michael said that stopped Steve Harvey cold. It was what happened next, when the woman who had given birth to him 8 years ago realized she had been replaced by someone who had chosen to love him without obligation. The cameras kept rolling, but this wasn't entertainment anymore. This was the moment when America witnessed the most complicated definition of motherhood ever shared on television. Tuesday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta began with an energy that felt charged with unspoken tension. The Rodriguez family from Phoenix faced off against the Williams family from Memphis. But there was something about the Rodriguez family dynamic that immediately caught the production crew's attention. The way they positioned themselves suggested relationships that went deeper than typical family bonds, but also more complicated. Isabella Rodriguez, 22 years old with warm brown eyes and a smile that seemed to carry both joy and caution, stood at the family podium, wearing a simple blue dress that spoke of careful budgeting and practical choices. Next to her, 8-year-old Michael Rodriguez bounced with excitement, his small hand firmly clasped in Isabella's as if she were his anchor in an uncertain world. His resemblance to Isabella was non-existent, but the way he looked at her suggested a bond that transcended biology. Completing the Rodriguez family were Isabella's husband Carlos, 28, whose protective stance near both Isabella and Michael spoke of a man who had learned to navigate complex family dynamics with careful attention to everyone's emotions. Also present was Lisa Rodriguez, 26, Michael's biological mother, whose presence created an undercurrent of tension that seemed to pulse beneath the family's cheerful exterior. What the studio audience couldn't see, couldn't know from the family's composed presentation, was the story that had brought them to this moment. 3 years earlier, Isabella had been a 19-year-old college student working part-time at a coffee shop when she'd met Carlos, a divorced father struggling to raise his 5-year-old son alone after his ex-wife Lisa had left to find herself in California. The relationship that had developed between Isabella and Carlos had been gradual, built on shared values and genuine connection, but the relationship between Isabella and Michael had been immediate and profound. From their first meeting, when Michael had shyly offered her his favorite toy truck, they had connected in ways that seemed to bypass the usual adjustment period between children and new adults in their lives. Lisa had been largely absent during Michael's early years, visiting sporadically and calling irregularly. She had struggled with addiction, with mental health issues, and with the responsibilities of motherhood that had overwhelmed her at 18. During her absence, Isabella had stepped into the void, not as a replacement, but as someone who simply loved Michael unconditionally. Isabella had learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos when Michael wanted to understand why some kids had moms who did their hair. She had stayed up countless nights when he had fever or nightmares, had attended every school event, had cheered at every soccer game. She had helped him with homework, taught him to ride a bike, and answered the difficult questions about why his first mom wasn't around very much. To Michael, Isabella wasn't his stepmother or his father's girlfriend, who had become his stepmother when she and Carlos married. She was simply Mom, the person who kissed scraped knees, made his favorite sandwiches, and showed up consistently with the kind of love he had learned to count on. The complication had arisen 6 months earlier when Lisa, now sober and claiming to have found stability, had begun pushing for increased custody and involvement in Michael's life. She wanted to rebuild the relationship with her son, to reclaim the role she had abandoned when addiction and immaturity had made parenting impossible. But Michael, now 8 and old enough to have opinions about the adults in his life, had been confused and resistant. To him, Lisa was a familiar stranger who brought gifts and made promises but didn't know that he was afraid of thunderstorms or that he liked his toast cut diagonally. Isabella was the person who knew his bedtime routine, his favorite stories, his dreams and fears. The custody discussions had been painful for everyone involved. Lisa felt robbed of her chance to mother her son, convinced that Isabella had intentionally replaced her. Isabella felt torn between supporting Michael's relationship with his biological mother and protecting the bond they had built through 3 years of daily love and consistency. Carlos found himself mediating between the woman he loved and the mother of his child, trying to do what was best for Michael while navigating the complex emotions of both women. The Family Feud opportunity had come through Carlos's sister, who had submitted their application hoping that a fun family experience might help ease some of the tension that had been building around custody arrangements. The producers had been intrigued by the family's dynamics during the interview process, particularly by the obvious love that connected Isabella and Michael despite their lack of biological relationship. The trip to Atlanta had been the first time in months that the entire family had spent extended time together without lawyers or mediators present. For 3 days, they had tried to function as a normal family unit, with Isabella and Lisa carefully navigating their roles in Michael's life. During family introductions, Steve had approached them with his characteristic warmth, though something about the family's dynamics suggested relationships that might be more complex than they appeared. The Rodriguez family from Phoenix. Y'all ready to have some fun today? Carlos stepped forward as the family spokesperson, his voice carrying the diplomatic tone of someone accustomed to managing delicate situations. We're ready, Steve. This is my wife Isabella, my son Michael, and Michael's mother Lisa. The introduction itself carried weight. The careful way Carlos had identified everyone's role, the slight pause before Michael's mother when referring to Lisa, the way Michael immediately moved closer to Isabel when the cameras focused on the family. Steve knelt down to Michael's level, as he always did with younger contestants. Michael, you excited to be here with your family? Michael nodded enthusiastically, then looked up at Isabella. My mom Isabella said this was going to be the best day ever. The simple statement carried implications that seemed to shift the energy around the family podium. Lisa's face tightened slightly, while Isabella squeezed Michael's hand gently, her expression showing both love and concern about the public nature of his declaration. Steve noticed the subtle tension, his experienced eye catching the family dynamics that spoke of complexity beneath the surface. But the show moved forward, and the moment passed into the rhythm of Family Feud. The game progressed well through the first 4 rounds, though the family's interactions revealed the careful choreography of people navigating competing relationships. Isabella had been supportive but deferential, encouraging Michael while being careful not to overshadow Lisa's presence. Lisa had been engaged but seemed slightly out of sync with the family's natural rhythms. Michael had been excited and energetic but consistently oriented toward Isabella for comfort and guidance. During commercial breaks, production assistants noticed the complex family dynamics. Michael stayed close to Isabella, seeking her approval before answering questions and looking to her for reassurance. Lisa tried to engage with Michael but seemed unsure of how to connect with a child who had grown and changed during her absence. Carlos worked to include everyone while managing the underlying tension, but it was during the 5th round that everything changed. The category that appeared on the board seemed innocent enough. Name someone who loves you unconditionally. Michael had been selected to answer, his first time approaching the podium alone throughout the entire game. He walked forward with the confident stride of an 8-year-old who felt secure in his family's love, but something in the way both Isabella and Lisa watched him suggested this question carried more weight than it appeared. Steve read the question with his usual enthusiasm, expecting a typical response about parents, grandparents, or family pets. Michael, here we go, buddy. Name someone who loves you unconditionally. Michael looked back at his family, his 8-year-old eyes moving between the 2 women who had complicated claims on the title of mother in his life. When he spoke, his voice was clear and certain, carrying the absolute conviction that only children possess when they speak from the heart. My real mom, Isabella. The studio fell completely silent. Not the brief pause of audience consideration, but the profound quiet that comes when people suddenly understand they have witnessed something that will change everything for everyone involved. The weight of those 4 words, my real mom Isabella, hit the family like a physical force. Lisa's face went pale, her hand moving to her mouth as if she could somehow take back what had already been heard by everyone in the studio and would soon be heard by millions of viewers. Isabella's eyes filled with tears immediately, but they were tears of conflicted emotion. Joy at Michael's declaration of love, heartbreak at the pain she could see in Lisa's face, and fear about the implications of this public moment for their family's already fragile dynamics. Steve Harvey, who had spent decades reading families and understanding their complexities, found himself in completely uncharted territory. He looked at Michael, who seemed confused by the sudden tension in the studio, then at the 2 women whose competing claims on motherhood had just been decided by the child at the center of their conflict. Michael, Steve said gently, walking closer to where the boy stood at the podium, tell me about your mom Isabella. What happened next would transform the show entirely and potentially change this family forever. Michael's face lit up with the pure joy of a child talking about someone he loves unconditionally. Isabella takes care of me every day. She makes my lunch for school and puts little notes in it that say she loves me. When I have bad dreams, she sits with me until I fall asleep. She taught me how to tie my shoes and ride my bike. His voice grew stronger as he continued, unaware of the emotional devastation his words were causing Lisa. She comes to all my soccer games and cheers really loud. When I was sick with the flu, she slept on the floor next to my bed for 3 nights to make sure I was okay. She's the best mom in the whole world." The studio remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of surprise. It was the silence of people witnessing a child's truth that was both beautiful and heartbreaking in its implications. Behind the cameras, seasoned crew members found themselves watching a family drama unfold in real time, suddenly understanding that some Family Feud episodes captured more than entertainment. They captured life-changing moments that couldn't be taken back. Steve looked at Lisa, whose tears were now flowing freely as she heard her son describe another woman as his mother with such complete devotion. He looked at Isabella, whose face showed the conflict between joy at Michael's love and empathy for Lisa's pain. "Isabella," Steve said softly, "what does it mean to you to hear Michael say that?" Isabella looked at Michael, then at Lisa, her voice steady despite her tears. "It means everything, Steve. But it also breaks my heart because I know how much Lisa loves him too. I never wanted to replace his mother. I just wanted to love him." The grace in that response, the way Isabella acknowledged both her bond with Michael and Lisa's pain, revealed the complexity of their situation in ways that went far beyond typical stepfamily dynamics. Lisa stepped forward slightly, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I left when he was 5, Steve. I wasn't ready to be a mother, and I thought when I got my life together I could just come back and pick up where I left off. But Isabella was there for him when I wasn't. She earned the right to be called his mom." The admission was devastating in its honesty, a biological mother acknowledging that motherhood isn't just about giving birth, but about showing up consistently with love and care. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of shows involving countless family dynamics, found himself facing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a custody dispute or step-family adjustment. This was a child who had organically bonded with someone who had chosen to love him, while his biological mother struggled with the reality that relationships can't be paused and resumed without consequence. "Stop the clock," Steve called out, his voice carrying across the studio with unprecedented authority. "Stop everything." The game show timers froze. The music cut out. The audience held its collective breath as they recognized they were witnessing something far more significant than entertainment. Steve walked to the center of the stage, positioning himself so he could address the entire family while staying close to Michael, who was beginning to sense that something important was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve began, his voice carrying a gravity that transformed the atmosphere. "We just witnessed something that happens in families across America every day, but rarely gets talked about honestly. We just saw what love looks like when it's complicated by biology, by choices, by second chances." He gestured toward the family. "Michael loves 2 women who both have claims on being his mother. Lisa gave birth to him, and that's a bond that can never be broken. But Isabella chose to love him every single day for 3 years, and that's a bond that can never be erased either." The audience remained silent, recognizing they were witnessing something sacred and complex. "Michael," Steve said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level, "do you understand that saying Isabella is your real mom might hurt Lisa's feelings?" Michael looked at Lisa for the first time since his declaration, his 8-year-old wisdom beginning to grasp the complexity of adult emotions. "I didn't mean to hurt her feelings," he said quietly. "I love Lisa too, but Isabella's the one who takes care of me every day." The innocence of that explanation, a child trying to navigate adult complexities with the simple logic of daily experience, highlighted the impossible position that divorce and remarriage often puts children in. Steve stood and addressed both women directly. "Isabella, Lisa, this little boy loves you both, but in different ways, and both of those loves are real and valid and important." He turned to Lisa first. "Lisa, what Michael is saying doesn't diminish the fact that you are his biological mother or that you love him, but it does acknowledge that Isabella has been his primary caregiver during some crucial years of his development." Then he addressed Isabella. "Isabella, the love Michael has for you is real and earned and beautiful. But part of loving him means helping him maintain a relationship with his biological mother, even when that's complicated." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. But instead of giving it to one person, he handed it to Carlos. "Carlos, this family is going to need professional help navigating these relationships, family counseling, mediation, support in figuring out how to honor both of these important relationships in Michael's life." But Steve wasn't done. He began removing his suit jacket, but this time he did something unprecedented. He didn't drape it around one person. Instead, he held it between Isabella and Lisa. "This jacket represents something I want both of you to share. he said. "The responsibility and the honor of loving Michael. Isabella, you've earned the right to be called his mom through daily acts of love. Lisa, you have the biological bond that connects you to him forever. Michael needs both of you, and both of you deserve to be part of his life." Steve turned to address Michael directly. "Michael, you are one lucky little boy because you have two women who love you enough to put your needs first. Your job isn't to choose between them. Your job is to love them both and let them figure out how to work together to take care of you." As the show concluded, something unprecedented happened. Instead of celebrating a winner, the studio became a place of healing and recognition for the complexity of modern families. Steve made an announcement that would resonate far beyond the game show format. "Families come in all shapes and sizes," he told the camera. "Sometimes the people who love our children the most aren't the people who gave birth to them. Sometimes they're the people who choose to show up every day with consistency and care. Both kinds of love matter." The episode that aired 12 weeks later became one of the most discussed in Family Feud history. Not because of dramatic moments or game show excitement, but because it had captured something rarely seen on television: the real complexity of modern family relationships and the way children navigate multiple parent figures. The response was overwhelming. The show received over 400,000 messages from viewers, many from blended families sharing their own stories of navigating complex relationships between biological parents, step-parents, and children caught in the middle. Family therapists reported increased interest in mediation services. Step-parent support groups saw significant growth in membership. But perhaps the most powerful response came from children in similar situations who suddenly felt less alone in loving multiple parent figures, and from adults who gained new understanding of how children experience family complexity. Steve Harvey said in interviews that the Rodriguez family episode changed how he understood both family and love. "I learned that day that family isn't just about biology," he explained. "It's about who shows up consistently with love, care, and commitment." Sometimes children are lucky enough to have multiple people who fit that description. The jacket Steve gave to the family hangs in their living room now, a symbol of the shared responsibility that Isabella and Lisa have learned to navigate. With the help of family counseling and ongoing communication, they have developed a co-parenting relationship that honors both Isabella's daily role in Michael's life and Lisa's biological connection to him. Michael, now 9 years old, has learned to articulate his feelings more clearly. He calls Isabel Mom and Lisa Mama Lisa, and both women have found peace in those distinctions. Isabel continues to be his primary caregiver, while Lisa has regular visitation and involvement in his school and activities. The business card Steve gave them sits framed in Carlos's office, representing the moment when their private family complexity became a public education about the many ways that love creates family bonds. Every Mother's Day, both Isabella and Lisa receive cards from Michael, one that says, "To the best mom ever," and one that says, "To my first mom." The tradition reflects the wisdom of a child who has learned that love multiplies rather than divides, and that having multiple people who love you isn't a problem to be solved but a blessing to be celebrated. The lesson the Rodriguez family taught that Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta is profound. Family is created not just by biology, but by choice, consistency, and unconditional love. Sometimes children are fortunate enough to have multiple people who fit the definition of parent, and sometimes the adults in their lives must learn to share that role with grace and generosity. And sometimes it takes an 8-year-old boy, 2 women who love him, and an oversized suit jacket to remind a television studio full of people that the most important question isn't who is the real parent, but how can all the adults who love this child work together to give him the best possible life? Because that's what real family looks like. That's what shared love sounds like. And that's what happens when a game show becomes a masterclass in the beautiful complexity of modern families, where love creates bonds that transcend biology and children teach adults that hearts are big enough to hold multiple versions of parental love.